from the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today I'm very pleased joining me, Joe Conley, CTO of Techsight. Joe, the way I love to do it is I keep it to my guests to introduce themselves. So tell us a little bit more about you, your background, and what you're currently up to, and then we can take it from there.
Okay, great. Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on. Yeah, so my name's Joe Conley. I'm a CTO based in the greater Philadelphia region. I've been in software for over 16 years now. Started out kind of full stack engineering, focused on kind of data integration, scaling data platforms, things like that. And the latter half of my career, I've been very interested in working with startups. So I've kind of naturally gravitated towards the CTO role. And so I've been CTO for a couple of different PropTech firms in the area. And now I'm doing kind of more fractional CTO work under my company, Techsight. Working for some private M&A companies, doing some M&A due diligence, working for a few different startups at the various phases, whether it's pre-revenue, kind of scaling. So, I think I've really embraced and like that challenge of being able to spend one day doing something that's, M&A tech due diligence, spend the next day helping a company grow from, literally 0 to 1. And then, another day helping a company that's already had product market fit and already kind of shown the growth and kind of try to figure out, okay, how can I help these guys really scale and really start going from walking to running? So I really enjoy that challenge of kind of, every day is a different challenge. Every day is kind of a different set of problems and opportunities. And, so I've really kind of embraced that. And I think that's kind of what my personality is. I kind of like to solve different problems. I don't like to be kind of stuck doing one thing. And that's kind of how I got into startups. Anyone who does startups know it's, you're always wearing a lot of different hats. And so I've really enjoyed my time there in startup land.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a nice place to be. Now, while preparing for the episode today, Joe, like I've seen like you have really a very rich and mixed also blend of verticals that you have worked with, like from telecom, healthcare, logistics. So, but when it comes to be a technology leader and be a CTO, obviously, whether in a full-fledged capacity or like as a fractional, what you can tell us like that some common thread, I would say, in building, robust systems that can serve the aim of that startup, or even if it's a full-fledged, running business, scale up business. So what is like the common, I would say, thread you saw in building these efficient systems and, making sure that everything is working perfectly across these industries?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is really having a good understanding of the business and the market that you're in. Certainly between PropTech or telco or healthcare, there's very specific dynamics that sort of govern these different marketplaces and these different markets and companies. And, they can be very idiosyncratic. They can be very, taking PropTech, for example, that can be a very hyper-local domain where even county by county, people do things different ways and they format data different ways. So I think having a grounding in that, and I think that's probably a good sort of general point for anyone who wants to be a CTO, is to really, I found the best CTOs tend to kind of have come up as engineers, but they also have developed just a strong business sense. Like, okay, if I'm going to build this system, what is the business value of the system? Is it going to provide an ROI for the business, or is it a science fair project? I've certainly developed a sort of a distaste for kind of spending a month and doing something and have it be completely disconnected from the business. Like there has to be some connection to the actual domain that you're in. And again, I think that's sort of why I guess I got involved in and gravitated towards startups, because I do find the business aspect interesting and it does dictate a lot of what you can do. And at the end of the day, especially if you're a startup, if you're not keeping the business priorities front and center, then at some point you're going to run out of runway. You're going to run, you're going to burn through your capital reserve. So So that to me has been the most interesting, I think, challenge for me is, I've certainly spent the first half of my career just focused purely on the technical aspect of things and how to build systems and how to build systems at scale. But then kind of adding that extra dimension of like, okay, you can build a system at scale. Like, okay, well, how is it going to be tailored to your target market? Especially for startups that maybe aren't going to, explode in the next 12 months, that need to kind of scale gracefully. It's like, okay, I know how to build a system, but how can I build it in a way that it aligns with that kind of 12 to 18 month timeline? And how can it scale gracefully over the period? But again, still be reactive to the fact that, okay, we could see upticks in volume and transactions and things like that.
Absolutely fantastic. Now you mentioned also something introduction about M&A, and like this also, like there's the CTOI when it comes to doing due diligences, right? So I like to start with the red flags, right? So what are like some of the red flags that you always try to spot whenever you approach a new technical diligence in an M&A deal?
So in terms of red flags, and for most of the engagements I've done, it's typically involved sort of an interview with sort of the target, the target's like head of technology, whether it's a CTO or just a founding engineer type approach. Um, and so I typically, and again, it's a tough needle to thread because you want to find out what's true. You want to find out what the system, how the system was built, but you want to do it in a way that doesn't really over critique them. Because again, anyone who's built a startup knows that nothing's perfect. You're going to incur tech debt in certain areas, and certainly you can get defensive if 5 years later you're trying to sell the software and you're trying to put a nice kind of red ribbon on top of it, and you have someone like me come in and kind of growing you like, okay, well, you chose this stack. Why did you choose this stack? Why didn't you choose A, B, or C? That sort of thing. So where I see red flags, and again, going beyond kind of the basic sort of, because there's tools you can use to help automate a lot of this process, but I think where I add the most value is having a human conversation with target, and I'm really understanding why they did something. And certainly if they get to a point where they're super defensive, or if they don't have a strong justification for what they've done in terms of an architectural decision, that usually means, okay, I need to dig a lot deeper on that area because there's probably something there that could bite us if we acquire this company. And then also, if they're very reluctant to talk about a certain aspect, that's probably common. If I'm asking very simple questions about like where do you store your data or things like that, and I get very kind of one word answers or very evasive sort of responses, then that sort of triggers my curiosity. Like, okay, so not what I expected to hear, and then I'll try to dig deeper, either explicitly with that resource or just on my own kind of due diligence as well. So yeah, and again, like I said, it's a tricky process where you have to really have to thread a needle there in terms of trying not to be too insulting, but at the same time, it's my job as a due diligence expert to really understand the truth and then understand what we're getting into, and understanding if we acquire and operate this thing, is it going to blow up in our face in 6 months, that sort of thing.
Right. So Joe, one also, I'm not sure you are the expert here, and that's why I'm asking this question. Let's say, there are no red flags, right? But let's say I'm the one who gonna acquire this new startup, right? They built fantastic technology. They have everything, as it should be by book. But let's say, you know, there are like differences between the technologies that we have built in-house, let's say, or we have acquired over the years,
Yeah.
and what these guys they have built. Or maybe, they built something fantastic. Everything is again done very, very good, but it's not designed to be serving like large scale customers. So in these situations, like what have you seen the best approach to solve? Like I just came up with these two scenarios which I heard from people, they're kind of common sometimes. So what's your point of view on such scenarios?
Okay, so taking the first scenario, which I guess was the integration challenge, that's certainly a big aspect of sort of like the pre-acquisition analysis that I do. And really, it's sort of dependent on the acquirer, what their kind of overall philosophy is in terms of, do we want to centralize all those functions, all the engineering functions, or do we want to keep things more decentralized? And maybe we're just acquiring this product for, say, cash flow or things like that. We're not trying to maybe we're not trying to achieve economies of scale. We just want to kind of acquire this product and maybe fold it in with others that are in a similar industry, but not necessarily do a pure integration, just kind of keep the product as is. I certainly prefer the latter. Like I'm a huge fan of Constellation Software and an investor in them, and they are very much in the latter camp of just kind of keeping things very decentralized, and they have very little in terms of kind of central functions and enforcing folks to use kind of central services. They're very much take this decentralized approach where they acquire a company, that's very much sort of acquire and operate, and again they do full things under brands, but that's more kind of more of a market type of approach that, they don't do a ton of sort of central integration. So, software is hard. So I certainly, for the clients I've worked with, I've certainly encouraged more of the latter path in terms of, acquiring a stable product and, more often than not, trying to achieve economies of scale that have any really significant long-term value can be really challenging. And there's always going to be challenges trying to, refactor, entire products just to put them on your stack. It has to be a very special situation for me in terms of, is there really a lot of value? Are we really at the scale where integrating all of these products that we're acquiring really helps achieve economies of scale? And again, there are exceptions. Certainly, if you're a massive fund and, let's say you have, big contracts with maybe some of the bigger cloud providers, and you just can realize a lot of discounts and savings from there, then probably at that scale, yes, then maybe integration makes sense. But certainly if you're maybe more of a middle or small market player where you just want to kind of build a portfolio of maybe, 6 to 10 different companies and maybe 1 or 2 different verticals, then, it's just it's such a headache to try to integrate those folks to use one stack. And, I'd say most of the time it's not worth the technical cost, and then just the manpower to get there. And then just to make sure that nothing breaks is, that would certainly kind of keep me up at night. So that was the first area, I think, integration. And
Right.
the second I think you mentioned was kind of dealing with scale.
Right.
Honestly, the biggest way to really attack that is really to make sure that we're acquiring a company that can be set up for scale. Most of the acquisitions I've seen tend to be on a cloud provider, so I haven't really seen many recently where that we've had to do something where we're on some custom metal or some custom on-prem kind of deployment. It does seem like most of the folks have gotten the memo that cloud is the way to go. So that's been very encouraging and certainly made my life easier. But I mean, what's nice is I think most folks do tend to use kind of the big three in terms of cloud providers. Now, I've tended to specialize in AWS, but I've worked with others as well. There's definitely things that you can do to kind of help in terms of scale. And again, AWS provides some nice migration tools. I know there's the AWS DMS, like a data migration service that kind of makes that migration process easier. So maybe if you want to take data that's in, say, maybe a non-AWS database and move it to yours, that's great. So really, I think the challenge is kind of finding targets that are already cloud compatible. And if not, maybe find it, and again, if it's still an acquisition that you want to make, maybe finding someone like myself or someone who can specialize in getting them to be cloud compatible. So it's almost, to my mind, it's more kind of preparing the target company to be in a certain state that you can have it in the cloud. Because once you have it in something like AWS, AWS has literally hundreds of services that can really make this process easier between migration and scaling up data and defining scaling policies and things like that. So it's almost more of like, once you can get it in the ecosystem and get it to be effective in that ecosystem, then that's kind of the biggest battle from there. And honestly, beyond that, if you're looking at acquiring something that is super complex and would be a huge effort to rewrite to get to scale, then from my experience, a lot of times that's a pass. It's like, okay, the juice isn't worth the squeeze there. It's going to take us all this effort just to get it to scale. And maybe there's other levels of risk at different areas, whether it's at the product or the market area. And we just kind of do a pass there.
Okay, great. Now, just quick question. Is there any vertical where the technical due diligence is harder than other ones?
I would say so, certainly. I haven't really done much in verticals that are like super, like, really deep in terms of like a niche, say in technology, like maybe a super like hardware niche, for example. But I mean, certainly what I've seen, I've done a couple now in like the real estate sector, and I wouldn't say it's hard technically. It's just the biggest problem in real estate is data is just everywhere. There's providers on the brokerage level. There's providers like the Zillows of the world. They provide things like metrics data. There's, the MLSs, the multiple listing services. There's roughly 500 plus of those across the country. And while there is an effort to standardize their data can still be pretty disjointed. So So the challenge there is more of a trying to get all the data to speak the same language, to be in the same format, and to be processed in real time or close to real time, and understanding how that works, understanding all the business logic that happens. And again, for certain real estate companies who are trying to collect all this data, trying to understand how they process it and making sure they're doing it in an effective way. But certainly, yeah, I wouldn't describe that as really a deep technical challenge. It's more just more like herding cats. Like, we have all these different processes and making sure we have full line of sight into how those processes are designed and how they're designed from a failover perspective, how they handle things like if an API goes down, that sort of thing. So it's more that's where more the due diligence sets in. It's just more of just making sure that from an operational perspective, we have a good understanding of, is this API well covered? How do we handle failure? How do we handle downtime? Are we, things like that.
Yeah, makes sense. Absolutely, Joe. Now, because you mentioned PropTech a couple of times, and PropTech is, I think, like something I didn't cover it much, on the show, like, maybe one time last year. But, because I'm based in Dubai, so anything
Okay.
related to properties is very, and PropTech is on the rise, I would say. So there are a couple of startups. So what trends, have been you seen like really they are transforming the real estate industry these days?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yes, certainly I think data standardization is one. I sort of already talked about that just in terms of really trying to find ways for folks to develop a data standard. And there's an organization called Rezo who's developed this standard over time. And I found their work extremely helpful just in terms of managing data integrations from a bunch of different sources. Certainly seeing a lot of Gen AI as well, just in terms of, with my first real estate startup, we had a very kind of basic machine learning process to rank seller leads. So it was more in the residential real estate space where, if you're a real estate agent, you want to develop kind of whether it's in your CRM, wherever it is, just a list of kind of seller leads that you can go through. And we developed some technology there to help rank those seller leads based on all the data that we had access to. But now you're seeing, and again, that was more of a traditional machine learning process, but nowadays you're seeing a lot of those functions being kind of taken over by Gen AI in terms of just basic recommendations, in terms of financial analysis and financial health, taking a look at potential home buyers and understanding their profile and understand, what they can afford in the current market and things like that. And so I'm definitely starting to see more and more usage of that, having a Gen AI copilot help walk you through the home buying process, understanding what your needs are, where you're looking, and helping to improve that. But again, just like in all industries, it's sort of like there's a popular term now called the jagged frontier where, Gen AI can make a lot of progress in one specific direction, and then maybe in other areas it's not as helpful. So, we're still in this age right now where, especially with Gen AI, it's very much an experimentation age where we just want to find out what we can do, what works, what doesn't. And, as these models get better and better, and certainly the focus recently with these models is more on reasoning, I do think that we'll start to see better and better results just in terms of being able to meet those kind of core business functions in prop tech and elsewhere.
Right. You mentioning, Gen AI, and, I'm sure, like myself, you've seen many tech waves, over the years. And you are mentioning like it's still kind of its infancy, right? From Gen AI perspective. But if you want to compare within this short time, the of course, there is a lot of doom and gloom. Everyone knows about it. But
Yep.
if we want to compare, for example, the previous waves of these emerging technologies with what Gen AI have done so far, how do you see, the impact on transforming the technology, including not only, I mean, from the sector's perspective, we're just talking about, for example, M&A. So, for example, utilizing even Gen AI for M&A and so on. Of course, I had a fantastic episode with Matt Van Italy, I think a couple of months ago, and he leads a company that helps actually in, discovering the code and, if there's something wrong with the code. But from your perspective, Joe, what are you seeing, the most promising aspects of utilizing Gen AI in general, not in a specific sector?
Sure. Sure. So just in terms of technology waves, I've really only seen up front probably the more recent one before this, which is probably the move to the cloud and cloud infrastructure. So when I first started, we had kind of the bare metal servers in the back room, and we if we wanted to increase the scale of our platform, then we had to go buy another server and get that set up and things like that. So I'd say cloud was the biggest wave that I've seen and actually been a part of kind of firsthand, just kind of seeing the impact of it. And it certainly feels like Gen AI is a similar level of impact where it literally changes the way we work. It literally makes us more efficient. It does drive greater productivity. And really the biggest way I'm seeing that is sort of having AI enhance existing engineers, enhance their work and make them more productive. So you talked about M&A. I've been doing M&A kind of advisory for almost 2 years now. And probably for the last 9 months, I've been much more active in using Gen AI for helping me look at code, for helping me sort of analyze a market. So if I'm looking at a brand new product, brand new market, I'm completely coming in cold, having just talking to AI for 10 minutes and kind of doing a lot of iterative work with it, not just relying wholly on it. Because I think anyone who's done enough of work with Gen AI knows that it can't just be a one-way street where you just rely on it for everything. It's got to be very iterative where you kind of do a piece of work, then try AI for a bit, have it maybe even do the work in parallel, maybe compare and kind of take the best of both. But certainly in M&A, it can really help tackle a huge code base. There's great tools out there like Cursor, where you can basically have your code base on your local machine and have this great tool like Cursor be able to analyze either specific chunks of the code or the entire code base and ask very basic questions and then drill in to very specific things as needed. So that's been a huge help. That definitely has saved me a ton of time compared to more manual ways of looking at code. So that's just even on the M&A side. So even just for basic engineering productivity, it's definitely at least a 2 to 3x multiplier, I think. Again, using tools like Cursor and things like that, where the biggest value in a tool like Cursor is that it's so ingrained in the context of the way you work. And I think that's where we still have the biggest opportunity in terms of leveraging Gen AI is to be much more integrated into the current ways of work and have it be much more seamless. I know there's tools out there like Whisper where you can basically, as you're doing work, you can basically just talk out loud and it can record things and kind of almost be like a coach that basically like a pair programmer in a way that's kind of sitting right next to you. But Cursor is another great example where you don't even have to leave your code base. Like you can literally be looking at your code, either type a question in line for the code to get some code changes or use a chat window that's in the same kind of context as well. So that's where I see the biggest value. Certainly I think the ability to chat is nice. It's simple and easy. And again, one of the greatest things about Gen AI is how great it does with natural language. Like it can literally, I can type any question. I can type in typos, things like that. And it gets still very much because it's using that very powerful kind of statistical inference. Even if I do typos or different languages or whatever, it can still kind of parse that out and understand what I'm asking and at least try to predict a reasonable response. And again, it's not perfect, but I definitely see a ton of value for engineers to help them do their work. But again, like you said, yes, I've definitely seen situations where folks just aren't really embracing it. They either are kind of doom and gloom and they just think it's coming to take their jobs, or they've tried it once and got a bad outcome and just stopped trying it again. So that's where anyone I talk to, I definitely encourage them to be patient, to really try in a couple of different use cases. And I think if they put enough effort and have enough of an open mind, I think they will see the benefits of it and they will see how it can really kind of turbocharge their own work.
Yeah, I always, it's not always, like recently I start to tell people, like, I'm not sure if it's, it's a coincidence, of course. So when the search engine started to appear, and of course, like Google was leading the way. So that was before, the social media, the Instagrams and the TikToks, and where everyone was trying to show like, hey, like I know, like this technology. So generative AI came up when this waves where everyone is and I'm not against that. So there are great content out there, and people started to have these different ideas and criterias and about how the best way to use the Gen AI. Gen AI is good for that, bad for this. But to your point, Joe, and this is something I experimented personally. So not only like, of course, not relying 100% on the Gen AI, of course, like acting as a co-pilot, as Microsoft they call it. But another thing which I started recently to really get benefit out of it is using at least 2 Gen AI tools for getting better results. So mainly I use ChatGPT from OpenAI and I use Claude from Anthropic.
Yep.
And the results like really are mind blowing because, I take the output from there, I put it into other tool vice versa, by the way. It's not like someone is better than the other.
Yep.
And then, I get really a very, very, very refined result. I say, wow, like I couldn't even think about it. And I think both with they start to include this reasoning within the model. So it's really fascinating. Now we talked about, like on from technology perspective, the value. If I want, and of course, like as a CTO, whatever you're working, like on a organization which is large organization, or as a startup, so the customer is in mind, right? So from your perspective, what's like in your opinion, the main value proposition to customers in industries you worked in or you're currently maybe supporting, for the value that really the customer worry about?
In terms of Gen AI or in terms of just the
Yes,
industry?
Gen AI.
Okay. Yeah, certainly I think the value, and again, I guess what I've seen the most is just kind of general productivity gains. So certainly when I'm talking to CEOs and founders of startups who are just kind of dipping their toes into the pool of Gen AI, they certainly the biggest hesitance, I don't cost hasn't been as much of an issue recently. I think some initial conversation I had, there was definitely concern of like this costs way too much and it's wrong half the time. So why would I bother? So I haven't seen cost being as much of a barrier to entry for these folks recently. I think more of the concerns still tend to be around data privacy, worrying about giving these companies potentially access to their data. And again, there's solutions for that. I think that are becoming more and more popular. Where you don't have to give data per se. And what's great with open source models like Meta's Llama and other great open source models where you don't necessarily have to send data off to a third party. So again, I don't think data privacy is becoming as much of a concern as it used to be. But so I think what I've seen lately is that folks have definitely seen the value of having a chat GPT like or Claude like chatbot embedded in their products. They've seen kind of the base, like, okay, you know, having that basic kind of interface and having it be more dynamic than say sort of a more traditional deterministic chatbot. I think they see the value in that. But I think there's sort of they're at kind of like a plateau right now with like, okay, we see a chatbot, it works most of the time, that's great. Kind of asking what's next? Like what is really the long-term goal here? Because again, chatbots are nice, but that's not really the promise, I think, of this revolution that is and the hype that we're starting to see. So I think that's a very good question that we're trying to answer right now is what is the long-term direction of these Gen AI tools? For me, I think, companies like Palantir, I think are doing a great job of showing us what that vision looks like. And again, I think it's much more grounded in sort of operational intelligence and understanding how your enterprise functions and being able to use sort of in very kind of almost surgical ways, being able to use Gen AI at very specific choke points of your kind of normal enterprise process to help enhance it or even just do it, 100% autonomously. So I think that's kind of where the biggest value is heading is in terms of having very specific agents with very specific jobs being fed kind of private enterprise level data and being fed like, okay, here's, or being trained on or fine tuned on how, an enterprise usually does things or how they execute workflows and giving the agent enough interface to be able to do most, if not all of those kind of typical workflows. So again, it kind of just circled back to that idea of kind of enabling higher productivity. And again, and I'm still optimistic, and maybe I'm too optimistic in this sense, but I'm still optimistic that this is still a tool to enable the current workforce to be more productive. I don't see it replacing folks per se, but again, like with any sort of technology revolution and any sort of wave like this, I'm sure there's going to be some displacement somewhere along the stack. But I do think with today's tools, and I mean, you can learn anything today. Literally just go on a website and you can be with enough discipline and enough structured courses, you can learn engineering in no time. So I'm certainly encouraged by the way we're set up today, where even if you do have some level of displacement, I think you can find ways to reskill and potentially join forces with Gen AI, and not think of it as an antagonistic force, but more join forces with it. Let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm optimistic like yourself, Joe. And I believe what people needs to do is like, okay, to accept that it's here to stay.
Yep.
It, as we were mentioning, and you mentioned also as well, it's still early. stages, but it proved that it can do something, right? So it can
Right.
solve some problems. And you mentioned about the agents and the specialized agents. And, I'm happy to see, because when I first saw the early tries of these open source agents that communicate with each other, I guess that, yeah, like this is the direction. And now I'm seeing, the big players in the space saying, yeah, like we're gonna develop these agents. And like, even to your point, people can do it themselves, because you can train, on your own data, the open source LLM, on your own finances, and you train it on your own, like how you hire people, and you train it on your to do this, and then you let them communicate with each other. So you have now, of course, still human supervision is required, and this is why I tell people, because you are there to actually, you still kind of the project manager, the
Right.
lead, whatever you want to call that position,
Right.
and you give this task. And like, this is, I believe, technology, and not only technology, like this is how humanity have been always. We have something new that replaces the old. And of course there will be SaaS, oh no, this is destroying jobs, and this is gonna cause poverty, and this is gonna cause chaos. Yeah, of course we gonna we will have these people all the time, but
Right.
yeah, so we have to live with it. Now, one question, before I jump to something else related to Gen AI. When you talk Gen AI, so we're talking a lot about innovation, right? So, and you just mentioned about the companies that they just, put into sort of a chatbot and so on. And I know, like, you have, your perspective that you advocate for, which is simple, elegant solutions. So, how to not, exaggerate the use of AI at the same time, and keep the things simple rather than overcomplicating by just putting Gen AI for the sake of putting Gen AI.
Right. Right. And that's a great point, because I certainly think a lot of folks, and I'm certainly guilty of this as well, certainly have that sort of shiny object syndrome where they see this brand new toy, they want to just use it everywhere. And there's that old saying, if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. And so certainly there's a temptation by product owners and founders who just want to just use it everywhere they can, and be able to talk about it and put it on their investor decks and things like that. But I think that's where it goes back to having a real grounding in the space that you're in. And I'm lucky. A lot of the founders I've worked with have kind of been in their own industry niche for like 20 plus years, and they just know, like the back of their hand, they know the problems they're trying to solve. They've been through it. They've been through these battles and trying to solve these problems, and they now have kind of had this epiphany, or had this idea of how to make these problems either go away or make them a lot easier to deal with. And so I think I've just been lucky enough to work with folks like that, who are just so grounded in the business that they're in, and they know they want to solve a specific problem. And these folks just tend to, they're open minded to Gen AI, but they're not just going to throw a chatbot on there and just hope it solves a problem. Like, they're very much grounded in, like, okay, like, what is the business we're in? Like, let's stay focused on what is the value we're driving. And in a lot of cases, yeah, chatbot is more of a nice to have. It's not really we're not really solving that job to be done type approach, and understanding what the true pain point is of users. Because, you know, take data analytics, for example. Every data analytics platform, and you've probably seen a lot, you probably know of a lot. They basically they take your data, they reformat it the way you want it, and they give you a nice visual, whether it's a nice dashboard or whether it's a nice export into CSV or Excel. We could certainly build a chatbot that could talk to that data, and maybe just to tell you some basic facts about the data, right? But a lot of times that might not be useful. A lot of times what the chatbot could say is probably already up on the dashboard. It's probably, or it's very kind of surface level insights that aren't really going to tell you much. So we could spend, 6 months or whatever it is to build a chatbot that generates SQL queries and kind of does what the dashboard already does. But at the end of the day, is that really going to drive ROI and business value? There's a chance it might not. So that's where it really is important that if we're building something with Gen AI or whatever it is, Gen AI or anything, we're really super clear about what value, like, what are we doing different that hasn't been done? Like, where are, like, the true insights going to come? Where is the true business value going to come from? Because we don't want to go down a rabbit hole for a few months and build some chatbot and then find out, oh, users aren't even using it. They don't really even care about it. So I'm definitely very skeptical of situations like that. And that's why I certainly preach to the folks I work with, whether it's engineering teams or more of the business folks, to really have rapid iteration. especially for projects like Gen AI. Like I think we can very quickly build up a prototype, but I think it really is important to get it in the hands of users and really just get their feedback. And would you actually use this thing? If it said something different, would you use it? And that's important across all software, not just Gen AI, but to really get that customer feedback, have them be like almost like a first class citizen, almost like as if they were sitting right next to you while you're writing the code. And the customer saying, "Oh no, I wouldn't use that," or "No, that's not useful," or "Oh hey, that's really cool. I wish I had something like that." It's super important to have that customer kind of be front and center.
So basically, we need to know, the business benefits. And I think this doesn't apply only to Gen AI. This applies.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's part of just writing great software is really just having that customer perspective front and center. And because it's really easy to get lost in the weeds of writing software. You can build up all these sprints in Jira and build up backlogs and things like that. And especially if you're an engineer and that's all you see, then you really kind of lose that really important business context of why we're building what we're building, what it is that's most important. So it's really important to try to do things that keep that front and center. So I certainly like to do things like have really strong visuals. I tend to be more visual learner, so I tend to gravitate towards drawing some nice diagrams, but also also kind of mapping out the user flow and just having that kind of have a nice picture of that. So everyone who's touching the product has a good mental model of how it's going to be used and where the value is coming from.
Right. And I think, I I imagine, it's not, again, not only Gen AI.
Right.
So when we do such, let's call them initiatives, whatever, to try to just, enrich, the tech stack to give better outcomes. So I think we are adding cost also as well. And maybe sometimes we need to do kind of a pivot, right? And this is where we will have the challenges of, moving, capital. Instead of building this, now we are going and building that, right? So do you agree with me on that, Joe? Like we have a challenge in allocating, capital around which tech stack we should currently be, putting. So we move, the things forward, or like, it's just like just a problem that always have been existing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, especially I've done a lot of work with startups, and if I had to say one thing that was my superpower, I think it'd be building systems, with that are very cost efficient. We'll say. I mean, I think I'm very frugal by nature, just how I am, I guess. And so I'm very conscious of anytime we're building any sort of system, I'm very conscious of how to build it in a way that we can build the first version in a very specific way that doesn't harm the future version, but it's still very cost effective. But yeah, so and again, that's probably another reason why I started gravitated towards startups is just that because that's just part of any business is being mindful of cost and understanding how those dollars are spent and trying to make a dollar spend for free. So I've always enjoyed that challenge. So like I see having that constraint as almost a making it more fun. Like it's like okay, like if you had millions of dollars to play with, like yeah, sure, you could build whatever you want, but like having
Absolutely.
having a set runway that you have to operate under, I think is a much more interesting and fun challenge to kind of design through. Because again, it's not just designing the technical piece. It's okay. How can I design it so it's still delivering business value? And oh, by the way, let's make sure we stay in budget because our runway is 9 months or something.
Right. As we are almost like, coming to the end. So I gotta try to combine these two questions into the one. So for folks who want to transition from technical role to an executive leadership role, such as CTO, whether as a, again, full time or like fraction, what kind of advice you can give them? And this is where I'm gonna merge it with the other questions. And from your experience, what is the, I would call it, the leadership philosophy that you have always used and you believe it was one of the main reasons for your success?
So for the first point, in terms of folks who are interested in transitioning to more executive leadership, I'd say first and foremost, just talk to folks who have done it. You'll probably hear 10 different stories, but I think it is important to understand what folks have gone through and understanding the reasons for why they wanted to transition. I will say if you're doing it just for hoping to make more money or hoping for the status of having that cool C-level title next to your name, I don't think that's a sustainable reason for doing it. And I certainly fell into that trap as well. The first time I was able to put that title in my LinkedIn, I thought it was cool. And then over the years, like, yeah, it's just a title though. Like it's just at the end of the day, it's like, it's more about the work you're doing and the value that you can bring to society and things like that. And, titles don't really mean a ton. So I think first and foremost, talking to folks, understanding what they've gone through, and understanding what really what is your reasoning for doing it? Because not everyone, I don't think everyone's wired to be at that level, I think most folks. So I think some folks might be happy just writing code and just staying focused just purely on the technical aspect of things and not have to worry about, can we pay the bills next month, or have to worry about market dynamics, or being on quarterly investor calls and speaking to the market and things like that. So I think that's first and foremost, understanding yourself and understanding your own personality and your own ways of work. And, is it a good fit? And having a really honest conversation with yourself, and ideally getting one or two mentors. I've certainly been lucky to have a couple mentors in my life, and they provided insights that I still reflect on to this day. Even just kind of just a simple sentence here or there that they just kind of mentioned offhand, I still think about, and still kind of helps me, and kind of helps my day to day, and helps me kind of keep perspective. So yeah, so I definitely think introspection is very important, and just understanding why you're doing things, and just and if possible, just see if you can try it out. See if there's some way that you can maybe do a quick side gig or something. If your current life situation can allow that, just try it out for 90 days on a side gig and see if it makes sense. So anything you can do to kind of to test your theory about, do I want to move up to this level, and validate that, or invalidate it. I think that's important. So that's in terms of transition. In terms of, I guess, my own leadership style, I think really having simple, effective systems, whether it's technical or whether it's communication, is probably the most important thing to me. And maybe it's the way I'm wired. Like, if things start to look too complex or feel too complex, I immediately just sort of take a step back and say, no, this is ridiculous. We have to make things a lot simpler. So I'm almost like allergic to things that are just too overly complex, or just have an excess of things. So that's probably why I ended up being a good engineer, because I think one of the things I've done well is take existing code that maybe was 100 lines and maybe turn it into like 10. So I've always been drawn to technology and frameworks, like Scala is a good one, or Python, for example, where you can really have a minimal amount of code and be able to express things in like the most simplest manner and still work. And I think that's sort of translated to how I sort of manage teams and manage communication as well. Like, I don't like to have a ton of, burdensome systems where we have to have daily check-ins, and you have to, do a bunch of things that are not related to the core job that we hired you to do. So I prefer to have the engineers focused on doing engineering work, and having just communication being quick, simple, clear, and effective.
Fantastic. Joe, I think these are all spot on points. And what I liked is your transparency also as well. And I think it takes like a little bit of humbleness, which indeed you have, Joe. And, to your point, like, I was chatting with someone the other day and said, like, okay, do you think this guy can take a leadership role? And this happens to some people. They say, look, he said, I love to write code, and I think I'm gonna stay doing it for a long time. I'm not into, and the guy was very straightforward, saying, no, I don't want to become, not because I can't, but I want to do something that I enjoy. And currently I enjoy doing software engineering.
Right.
So I don't want to go to this leadership or like kind of management first, of course, and so on, which is really fantastic, because also like people, and this is why I like when you said like it's not about the title, right? So honestly, I tell all people now, guys, you claim your own title. You don't need someone to give you the title to have it. So
Right.
brilliant points you brought, Joe. Finally, where people can get in touch with you and know more about what you currently do.
So you can find me on LinkedIn. My own personal website is called jpc2.org. And, I used to be more active in writing things there, but lately just haven't had much time. And then my company website is called techsight.dev, and just gives a brief explanation of kind of the fractional CTO work that I do, whether it's M&A, whether it's kind of helping startups scale, and one thing I've been doing recently as well is in a couple of use cases where part of the M&A was, okay, we wanted to operate this product, but then we also need a team to operate it. So in one or two instances there, I've kind of been serving as sort of the fractional CTO for like the acquired product. And I have a couple dev agencies that I partner with that I can help operate the products kind of post acquisition as well. So Techsight.dev should explain all that. Yeah.
Cool. For the folks who are listening to us on your favorite podcasting platform, so you can find the links in the show notes. You don't need to, just replay this for getting that. And if you are watching, of course, this on YouTube, you'll find them into the description. Joe, really, I enjoyed the chat with you today, and this is why I
Awesome.
was, explaining to you before we started. So I call it kind of a casual chat because this is where, you know we can get the best out of every guest experience. And today you shared a lot of insights, whether like related to the prop tech, M&A, Gen AI, and the leadership, and also like the transition. So these are like really good points that I think we were able to discuss today. So thank you again for giving us the time. And this is how usually I end my episode. So this is for the folks who are either watching or listening to us. If you just discovered this podcast by luck, thank you for passing by. I hope you enjoyed. If you did so, please give us a thumb up, share it with your friends and colleagues, and come again. And if you are one of the people who are always following and always sending me their feedback and their messages, thank you for doing so. Please keep doing that. I enjoy reading all your feedbacks. If I have something to enhance, happy to discuss it, happy to take it forward. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we will meet again very soon. Thank you. Bye bye.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.